Welcome to the Equity Team Podcast, where we provide Sedona, Arizona real estate insight to help you thrive during your next real estate transaction.
We have Clara Brechtel with us, and Clara, you are a short-term rental property manager. The company's name is Adobe Short-Term Rentals, and it's awesome to have you. Thank you. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks, Chad. I'm actually changing the name for just my Sedona and Cottonwood properties to Sedona Premier because I'm managing properties between Colorado and then Arizona and Scottsdale. And now that I'm getting so many properties in this area, I was like, oh, I need a more Sedona specific name. So
Perfect.
Sedona Premier will be coming soon.
All right, sounds good. I look forward to it.
Yeah.
So, Clara, I've worked with a lot of vacation rental property managers over the years, over the last 15 years or so. And, I've worked with some that are, more like the tight budget property managers. I've worked with the most expensive property management companies. I've worked with the smallest, the biggest, the whole bit. And, whether it's, 15, 20%, kind of commission towards the property managers, or whether it's 30% or even higher, I have consistently seen better occupancy rate and ADR results when working with you, and not only in my own properties, but also with my clients' properties. And so it's great to finally have someone that I can work with like yourself that's getting these great results. So how do you respond to this accusation of getting these top results? How do you defend yourself, madam?
Yeah, so that's awesome to hear. And like from my background of how I got into short-term rentals, I came in as an investor. So I bought my first two properties in Colorado that I turned into short-term rentals. So I completely understand the process and the amount of money that it takes to get the property up and running, and especially buying a property, in the past couple of years where prices have been really high. The people who are coming to me for property management aren't people who bought their property 10 years ago when maybe they could get by with mediocre rental rates and occupancy. Like now the properties need to be very competitive and managed really well to have a good return on the investment. So my goal for all of my investors is to allow their properties to cash flow, even with a property manager in place, which is very rare and difficult to find. So with my property management fee, I would say it's on the lower end for the quality of service that I provide. And for me, it's really important that I keep my expenses low as a company and run very lean. So I think it helps. I have a big tech background. I was a software engineer before getting into real estate. So I've been able to automate a lot of my business, and I don't need to hire as many administrative people because I've either automated it or figured out a way to do it myself with very little time. So yeah, that's how I can do it. And then as far as occupancy rates, the biggest thing there, I'd say, is using a good pricing strategy. So there's a lot of softwares that you can use to automate the pricing. The one that I use is called Price Labs. There's others out there, but I kind of tested them all and that was the best. And then also there's a lot of pricing that you can do manually in Airbnb just to kind of add little discounts that will boost your property in the Airbnb rankings. Yeah. So even if you add like a tiny 5% discount, Airbnb will put you higher up in the results. So I do that type of stuff if I have like a last minute opening that I want to get filled. And yeah, that helps keep the occupancy rates high.
A lot of our viewers might be curious kind of what is the process from, I'm looking with my clients at the market, trying to pick the perfect short-term rental property that's going to perform really well. And how do we get that to all the way to you? And then where does it go from there? So typically our process, Clara, and you already know this because you and I talk all the time, but my clients and I, we look at the market for a property that has great marketing potential, property that's going to really pop. It's going to really sizzle on Airbnb and VRBO and anywhere else. And it's going to look better. When everything is said and done, it's going to photograph better. It's going to whether it needs polish or not, you know, the end result is going to get people to take a double take when they're kind of scrolling through the listings in that area that are kind of comparable in price and things like that. So we get the property, we close escrow. You know, sometimes they need remodels, sometimes they don't. They almost always need to be furnished. So we get them, you know, furnished, we get them remodeled, splash on some paint if it needs it, add a hot tub if it needs it, and then hand it off to you, and then you work your magic. And sometimes you've been known to just to kind of help out a lot of these out-of-state investors. You've been known to also charge kind of a flat fee and help them out with furnishings. And I know you don't like to do that. It's you don't make money doing that. It's just to kind of help people out, but get that going, and you do a great job on that as well.
Thanks.
And then when you first get a property and they say, okay, Clara, we're ready to, you know, take this and run with it and get on the market as soon as possible. What's your process from that point?
Yeah. So once the property is all ready to go, it's furnished, has all of the little things that it needs to be rented out, then I usually go in there and kind of go through everything, especially if the owner set it up themselves. I'll go through, you know, a little checklist, because I have set up, you know, maybe 10 Airbnbs at this point. I know exactly the items that need to go in there. And usually if a client is coming to me and they say like, hey, we're going to fly out there and furnish the whole property ourselves, which some people have done, I will give them my furniture list and like kitchen stocking list, just so I know that I don't have to worry about them figuring all of that out on their own. Yeah. So usually the property is all ready to go. And then I create like a supply closet in the property, which has all of the extra linens, towels, and then consumable items that are replenished between every stay. So things like paper products and the coffee stand items and cleaning supplies for the guest, things like that. And then we put smart technology up to help with security. So we will also install the smart lock for the front door. I set up the smart lock with the Wi-Fi, plug it into my system so I can automate the door codes between every guest. And then we set up a security camera. And then from there, so I have my own in-house cleaning team, and all of my properties are staged the exact same and have the same amenities for each guest. So all of my cleaners are trained to know exactly how to set up and clean one of our properties. So after I get the supply closet going and all of that is ready, I can just send my cleaner in and say, you know, we have the first guest. Usually we'll do a deeper clean the first time, and they already know how to stage your property. So it's really not too much work once it's all furnished and ready to go. And with the design piece, you know, I have a love-hate relationship with it, I guess. I really enjoy the design part and making a property stand out. Like, that's really fun, but it is so much work. It's so many hours. So, you know, between managing properties and setting it up, it can be a lot.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Well, you know, it's interesting. You mentioned quite a bit a while ago that, you know, you go far enough back and almost everyone could succeed as a short-term rental owner, and they were seeing good returns, and you could almost thrive in mediocrity, you know, because the market was so strong and people are spending so much on their vacation budgets and all of this. It is harder now. And you know, I'm commonly seeing on investor websites and from potential clients, I'm commonly hearing feedback that people are struggling with a lot of their other short-term rentals, especially in other markets, and they're getting low occupancy rates, which is the #1 killer. So they're seeing 50, 65% occupancy rates, and that's the new normal for about 80% of short-term rentals on the market in the entire country right now. That's become the new normal. So that's not a way to make money. That's a way to lose money or break even. And what I'm seeing consistently in our system, and then handing the properties to you, and then your system, so our cumulative system, is we're seeing about 75% to 95% pretty consistent occupancy rates for what we have going on. Are you seeing that as well?
Yeah, I am. Yeah,
Yeah.
like 75 to 80, at least the past 6 months. Once
Yeah.
we get into the spring, that's when we start to see like the 90 to 95% occupancy out here.
Yeah.
And then summer's a bit slower, of course. But
Mhm.
the good thing about this market is that it's such a hot travel destination that there's not many slow seasons. Like, so I manage properties in Colorado as well, and the winters are pretty dead for about 4 months.
Mm.
That's a long time to go without much travel. But here, there's maybe 1 month where I get worried. It's August. It's like
August.
really
Yeah.
hot and slow here. But
Yeah.
even this January, which is typically a slower month, we're
Mhm.
still booked up at around
Mhm.
like 65-70% occupancy. It's definitely
Yeah.
slower than average, but it's still great. And
Mhm.
we're able to, cover the expenses for the investors.
Yeah. And the numbers that I'm seeing on average throughout the year is kind of a higher percentage. I tend
Yeah.
to see, at least 75-80% throughout the year, just based on, really intelligently leveraging the different seasons and doing everything in your power, of course, to market it like crazy and get it to show up at the top results for Airbnb and other resources and things like that too.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool.
Yeah, and it's also very important when you launch a property here.
Mhm.
So if you have a brand new short-term rental and you decide to launch at the end of May or start of June, it's going to be a bit tougher to get started with no
Mhm.
reviews, and it's slower. So
Mhm.
it might take a bit longer to get your like occupancy and ADR up. But if you're launching in end of January, that's the perfect timing to take advantage of the busy spring season, get a bunch of reviews, and then going into summer, you will still get a few bookings here and there to keep you pretty booked up.
Yeah. Okay, good. In the Sedona area, we do have a lot of tourism in the summer, and a lot of families with kids and a lot of families that are traveling together, and then friends that are traveling with other friends, and on and on and on. So even with that, you are seeing a slow. I know obviously August, and that's when a lot of the kids go back to school, and so there's kind of that buffer time. But are you seeing that there are issues with summer months?
I think this past summer was different from
Yeah.
summer 2 and 3 years ago. Like 2 and 3 years ago, if you look on AirDNA and look at the occupancy numbers, like it was pretty booked up in Sedona. And,
Mhm.
I've only been in Sedona for a year now. So this past summer was my first summer here. And from
Mhm.
all the operators that I talked to who have been in Sedona for a while, they said like the summer was unusually slow than what they're used to. So I don't know if it was related to people being able to travel internationally again, or, everybody came to Sedona during the shutdown because it's a good like drive-to market. So maybe everybody was like, oh, we did Sedona last year, let's try something else this year. But I don't know. I'm not sure what this summer will look like. But right now we're like very booked up for spring, far in advance. So
Yeah.
hopefully that's a good sign.
Well, that's good. Hopefully that feeds really beautifully into the summer as well, just
Yeah,
because occupancy is way, way up and they can't book. So they got to book it out and start filling that
I
pipeline
hope
up.
so.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
that's good. Now, about a third of my clients or so, maybe a little bit more, they choose to self-manage. And probably half of my potential clients talk about self-managing, but then that percentage drops as it gets real. Do you have any advice, general advice, any warnings, anything like that for those that wish to self-manage?
Yeah. So, I mean, I started out self-managing too. That's how I got into short-term rentals. I was working a full-time job and then self-managing. The good thing about my full-time job is that I was completely remote and had the flexibility to respond to messages throughout the day. So if you're self-managing, you need to be available pretty much 24/7 to answer the phone and text someone. Even right now, like I can't be away from my phone from an app like for an hour, because at any moment I could have somebody calling me or texting me who needs assistance. So I think that's the biggest thing, which can be hard if you work a job where you have to be actually at work the full day, which was different than what I had. And then also, like, if you are self-managing the property, you definitely need to fly out and stay at the property for a couple weeks. And the setup process is going to take a lot longer than you think it is. So I can typically set up a property in about 1.5 weeks from the time when I can get into the property, design all the furniture, and then get it all set up. For people that I've seen who fly out here and do it all themselves, it's taking them at least a month to 2 months to set up the property. A lot of them don't realize the amount of work that goes into it, and then it might just be them trying to do it, which takes a long time. And then also, do not skimp on things in the beginning when you're setting up the property, because you're just going to have to pay for it later. So especially when I set up my first short-term rental, I was on a tight budget, and I got some furniture items that weren't the best quality, or like some linens that weren't going to last a very long time. And, after 3 months, I just had to buy them again and replace those items. So it's definitely better to pay the money up front to get more quality items, because you do want to look at your short-term rental as a long-term investment. I think a lot of people look at it as like a year, maybe, like they aren't thinking of it as, oh, well, this lasts 3 years like this, but you do need a long-term strategy. And even after having the property up for a year, there is some refreshing that needs to be done. So after a year of having your rental, you really should fly out or have your property manager do like a detailed inspection of the property to see what items need to be replaced.
It's good advice. And I know that when short-term rental owners want you to furnish for them, and then they pay you that flat rate to do that, plus the furnishing cost, I know that you get some discounts on some furnishings. So it actually works out pretty well, where you're able to maybe pay the same amount that they would have paid for cheaper stuff, but because you get the discount, you're able to get the quality stuff that's going to last a long time. It's not just going to fall apart when someone sits on it or whatever it is.
Yeah, totally. And I've ordered so many items like from all the online furniture stores. I kind of have an idea of like what's going to last a while. I have ordered things in the past where I know they're just going to break. So kind of have some of that knowledge there.
Yeah. And to clarify for our viewers here, I know that you, and I would stand firm on this if I was you, but I know that you don't want to furnish anyone's house unless you're going to be managing it for them, because for you, the furnishing doesn't really make you any money, and it's a pain in the neck. So you do that to help them get to the finish line, basically.
Yeah, totally. And I know that if I furnish it, it's going to be done right. It's going to be done a lot quicker, and the property will be ready to rent out like way sooner. So, I do enjoy the furnishing process, but I can only take on so many at once because it's a ton. Yeah. And I do, like, once I start working on them, I try to get them done as quickly as possible. So then I stress myself out.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's going to take you away from producing for these homeowners and helping them make money. So I totally get that. Now, Arizona has had some really minor recent adjustments in terms of law, that impact short-term rentals. And statewide, we are a short-term rental friendly state. But recently there was one law, there was a bill that passed, and it allowed local municipalities, meaning towns, counties, things like that, to just require a few things in order to run a short-term rental. None of them are allowed to just say, no, we're not going to do short-term rentals, but some of them, may require a short-term rental permit, might require you go out and that you have a certain amount of liability insurance to cover your property, that you inform the neighbors that you're running a short-term rental, that you post a, fire exit map or something like that. So none of these are really restrictions, but running a background check, running some kind of a background check. So now they have the option to opt in on these requirements, some or all of them. Not really restrictions per se, but are you concerned about future short-term rental restrictions? How do you feel about that?
So I think them coming out with this new permit is a good sign for what the rental restrictions will look like for the next few years, at least. I don't know if this is just phase one and they have a lot more laws coming out, but everything that they recently came out with, I think is like nothing but good for the industry. It helps have a lot more quality control for the short-term rentals here. In Sedona, there are quite a lot of out-of-state owner operators who aren't at the property much and don't see it too much in person. So I think that's like, even for me, I have my own property in Colorado that I manage, that I have my own eyes on like once every 6 months. And I really need to trust that my cleaners and maintenance staff are doing their job well to prevent any issues. So if you don't have like a local manager checking in on the property or someone who's available to go over to the property immediately if there are any issues, that's when like problems can happen with your neighbors where they complain. So I think everything that has been put into action is good and will help the community, and hopefully the neighbors will be happier from it and it'll prevent complaints from happening.
Yeah, well said. The grouchy neighbor syndrome is the number one thing that I'm seeing, often. And usually what they do is, and these are like the neighbors that they have legally, they don't have much of a leg to stand on, but for some reason they've decided they don't like short-term rentals. It's allowed, to do it there, but they just don't like it. They've got it in their head that it's not a good thing. And so the number one thing that I'm seeing, and tell me if you're seeing something else also, is, if like a trash barrel is put out for the day of the trash, it's picked up, it's dumped, and then maybe it sits out there for a day or 2 or 3 days and no one's putting it away, then getting reported for that. Or, if you have a tenant who's maybe a little louder than they should be, we don't have much problem like that in this area because we're so far away from universities, from colleges. So we don't have the big parties like they're having in Phoenix, but maybe a noise complaint or something like that, which can come up sometimes. Are you seeing much of that?
I'm seeing some of it, but I'm in pretty close communication with the neighbors that have concerns. So I do have a property in Cottonwood where the neighbors are all pretty against the property being rented as a short-term rental, but I have gone over, personally met the neighbor right next door, and now he's almost the mediator for the whole neighborhood. He's like talking with the neighbors and saying like, oh, if you have issues, we'll just text Clara and ask her to fix something. So like,
how much do you pay them? They're working for you at that point. That's
I know,
great.
nothing. He's just, a lot of the people who live out here, they lived here for a long time. They want to protect their neighborhood and they're very vocal about their opinion. So like, for example, we had a fire pit in that backyard that sometimes the guests would leave the fire pit on and they wouldn't be sitting right next to it. So the neighbors were all complaining and it was like this problem that just kept coming up. So I was like, all right, I'm getting rid of the fire pit. It's just not worth the trouble with the neighbors. So it's very important to keep the neighborhood happy. There isn't too much that they can do, really. They can file complaints to the city, especially if you're in Sedona proper, and things like if your trash bin is out longer than 24 hours, or if you have a noise complaint and they start calling, especially now with the new permit, they can, cause some damage for your ability to rent it out. So you just want to stay in really good terms with them and try to satisfy whatever they need.
Absolutely. Yeah. Keeping the peace and, preventatively getting out there and introducing yourself and sharing all that is awesome. And I know that you do that for clients that they don't have to. And it's wonderful because you're already invested in working on these other properties. So you're already in the area, you're doing all of this, and it's easy for you to solve those issues and prevent them before they even surface. So that's really good.
Yeah, it definitely helps that, I live locally. They know that I'm nearby to respond to issues. Like, they even recognize my car when I'm coming to check in on properties, and they'll like walk outside and start talking to me about things. So it helps to have that kind of local representative for your property, for the neighbors. Yeah.
Awesome. So there are exceptions to what I'm about to say, and there's some really good exceptions, but generally there are basically like 3 local short-term rental markets out here. There's Sedona proper, meaning within Sedona city limits. There is just south of Sedona proper, which goes into Village of Oak Creek, which is still Sedona, still is Sedona, Arizona. It's just a different zip code, but it's not managed by the city of Sedona, and it falls within either 𝐬𝐽𝐽 County or 𝐶𝐭 County. So we've got Village of Oak Creek, we've got Sedona proper, and we've got Cottonwood, are kind of the three major short-term rental markets out here. All of them do quite well, and you and I have many clients that have purchased in all three of these markets and that you're managing for them. So what are your thoughts on these three markets? What are you seeing as far as differences? What's helpful for people to know?
Yeah, so I think in all three markets you can do well. There's definitely some like clear differences between the three. I mean, we can start out with Sedona. That's like the prime location that people want to stay in when they're traveling to Sedona. A lot of people think that they want to stay in Uptown Sedona, but being a local, like we know that Uptown isn't the best because of all of the traffic. So I really love West Sedona because you don't have to deal with the traffic, and then you're right in the heart of Sedona. So when people are searching on Airbnb, most people use the map feature. So they're going to be looking at where it says Sedona on that map and then your property and look at the proximity there. Yeah. So like I even have properties that are, right next to the word Sedona on the map, and they still message me like, oh, how far is this to like the heart of Sedona? And it's like, it is in the heart. So that's definitely like the prime location if you're trying to have a property that has the highest ADR and occupancy. But of course, you're going to have to pay for that. The properties are much more expensive there. It's harder to find a property that isn't in an HOA. And also that's like a quality rental that looks good. So, I mean, some of my best performing properties are in Sedona, but I'm sure that the investors have much higher expenses for those. And then going over to Cottonwood, the properties are much less expensive and the ADRs tend to be lower, but we see really high occupancy in Cottonwood. There's a lot of people who stay in Cottonwood to travel to Sedona for the day. So maybe if they want a bit cheaper of a place to stay, they'll commute to Sedona. And then there's also people who are traveling here just to go to the wineries in Cottonwood and Cornville. So a lot of them actually prefer to be closer to Cottonwood so then they can spend the day at the wineries instead of Sedona, which is interesting. I didn't really know too much about that. I thought everything was all about Sedona when I first came here. And then I also see people who are traveling just for like work purposes in Cottonwood. So a lot of weekdays tend to get booked up there. And just overall, we see higher occupancy and a bit lower of a ADR than Sedona. And then Village of Oak Creek, that market can be, it's a bit more difficult because some of the houses have a Village of Oak Creek address. Like it says the city is Village of Oak Creek, and people who are like looking for an Airbnb, they don't know what the Village of Oak Creek is. So even though it's like only 15, 20 minutes from Sedona, they just like aren't familiar with it. So it's really important to put in your description like the proximity to Sedona, but a lot of people just won't even click on the listing because they don't see that Sedona address. So that's the one downfall of Village of Oak Creek. But I think a property can still do really well there if it has, extra amenities. Like a lot of the properties in the village have pools, which can really help increase occupancy. And some of them might have bigger lots as well. So those properties can still do pretty well.
Cool. And by the way, I'm glad that you brought up the whole Village of Oak Creek versus Sedona thing. A pro tip from someone who has lived in the area for over 30 years is for homeowners that are that they're buying in Village of Oak Creek, don't put Village of Oak Creek on the address, both in if they're self-managing, to put Sedona, Arizona 86351. 86351 is the Village of Oak Creek zip code, but they all will GPS. They will all come up on anything from Google Maps, your mail will arrive correctly, the MLS, the post office, everyone does consider Village of Oak Creek to be Sedona, even though technically Village of Oak Creek is a separate entity from Sedona. It still has the Sedona vibe, the Sedona atmosphere, the Sedona Red Rock views. You're driving into these beautiful red rocks as you arrive in the Village of Oak Creek. And it's important for people to know that the Village of Oak Creek, it still is Sedona from most standpoints, but when it comes to construction permits, if a home has septic, dealing with the septic, things like if you want to do a garage conversion into more bedrooms and bathrooms, that's not going to fall with, and short-term rental oversight. So all of that falls through county and not through Sedona when you're in Village of Oak Creek, but everything else is Sedona, just a different zip code.
Yeah, I'll have to see if I can change that on Airbnb, because I think they
Probably
defaulted it to Village of Oak Creek. So maybe I can go in there and manually change it, but I don't know.
There's got to be a way, because even the post office calls it Sedona. I mean, everything does. So,
right. Yeah.
Anyway, that's good to know. Maybe that'll be another thing you can do to boost those a little bit further. That would be good.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And then for our viewers, if you probably are just kind of bubbling with questions about investing in these 3 markets or other nearby markets, and check out our other podcasts, check out our other videos, because I do dig into that more deeply in terms of the investing side. As far as the management side and short-term rental output, ROI and ADRs and occupancy rates and all of that, we're seeing great results in all of these market areas. But yeah, as far as the investing side and what goes into the property, check out those other videos and podcasts. Cool. Well, Clara, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for constantly helping my clients, our clients, to do so well on their properties. And you're a great resource, and I really appreciate you.
Of course. Thanks for bringing me on your podcast.
Anytime. I'll definitely have you on here again if you're willing.
Oh yeah, love to.
All right, awesome. Thank you everyone for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to the Equity Team Podcast. To speak with one of our top agents, visit us at owninaz.com. That's owninaz.com, or call us at 928-323-0031.